At 3:12 in the morning, the sky over central Israel didn't turn orange. It didn't turn red. It turned white. The kind of white that doesn't come from fire, it comes from physics. From a warhead moving at Mach 8, converting pure velocity into annihilation so fast that your eyes register the light before your brain registers that something has died. The first missile didn't announce itself, it simply arrived. Runway 1 at Tel Nof Air Base, gone before the first alarm completed a single cycle. 4 seconds later, the aircraft shelter complex ceased to exist. By the time the base commander picked up his emergency phone, his hand was shaking, not from fear, but from the vibration still moving through the earth beneath his feet. 43 Israeli combat aircraft were already burning. He didn't know yet that it was going to get so much worse. Tel Nof is not a base. Don't make the mistake of calling it that. Tel Nof is a doctrine. It is the living, breathing embodiment of what Israel has always believed about itself, that its air force is untouchable, unreachable, the ultimate guarantor of its survival. The F-15s, the F-16s, the modified long-range platforms that carry munitions capable of reaching Tehran, they don't just live at Tel Nof, they are the argument that says we can reach you and you cannot stop us. For 6 decades, no one successfully challenged that argument. In 37 minutes, Iran didn't just challenge it, Iran buried it. 300 Fatah hypersonic missiles launched in coordinated waves from mobile platforms scattered across Iran, Iraq, and Syria. The most precise, most devastating air-based suppression operation ever recorded in the history of modern warfare, and that is not dramatic language. That is the clinical assessment of military historians who are still, at this hour, struggling to process what the data is telling them. They did not miss, not 1 degree off target. Not one wasted warhead, aircraft shelters, fuel depots, munitions storage, runway infrastructure, radar arrays, command facilities, all of it struck with a circular error probable that Israeli sources, speaking in stunned, barely audible tones to international journalists, have described as under 8 meters, with a hypersonic warhead against the most heavily defended airspace on the planet. Israel's Air Force, the force that humiliated Arab armies on the ground in 1967, that reached into Iraq in 1981 and erased a nuclear reactor that has conducted thousands of strikes across Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, has lost air superiority over its own soil, and the war has not yet entered its second day. If this is your first time on this channel, here is what you need to understand about us. We don't do headlines. CNN will give you the headline. BBC will give you the reaction. We give you the architecture, the weapons, the doctrine, the strategic logic, the geopolitical fault lines that made this moment not just possible, but, if you were watching closely enough, inevitable. What happened at Tel Nof tonight is not a military event. It is a detonation of assumptions, of alliances, of an entire security framework that the Middle East has operated inside for 50 years. To understand why those assumptions shattered, why they were always more fragile than anyone admitted, and what the world looks like standing in the rubble of them, you need to stay with us every minute, because this is the story that doesn't end tonight. Subscribe now, turn on notifications. What comes next will move fast, and you need to be ready. Before we go into the machinery, 4 questions, and these are not rhetorical. These are the questions that every defense ministry, every intelligence agency, and every head of state is asking right now behind closed doors. First, Tel Nof Air Base sits inside one of the most sophisticated air defense architectures ever assembled. Iron Dome, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David's Sling, American Patriot batteries within range, electronic warfare assets permanently stationed at the facility specifically designed to disrupt incoming guidance systems. This was not a soft target. This was the most protected piece of ground in the Middle East. How did 300 hypersonic missiles penetrate every single layer of that defense and still hit with 8-meter accuracy? Was it a failure of technology, a failure of doctrine? Or was there something in Iran's strike package that Israeli and American intelligence had simply never imagined, because imagining it would have required admitting something they weren't prepared to admit? Second, 80 combat aircraft destroyed in a single strike. That is 30 to 35% of Israel's entire operational fast jet inventory gone in 37 minutes. The survivors are scattered, partially damaged, operating under conditions of command chaos and logistical collapse. The question that no Israeli general wants to answer publicly is this: can Israel reconstitute meaningful air power before Iran decides to come back and finish the job? Because if the answer is no, if that window of vulnerability extends beyond 48 hours, then tonight was not the strike. Tonight was the setup. Third, Western intelligence assessed the Fatah hypersonic missile as capable but immature. The accuracy demonstrated tonight 8 meters CEP against hardened targets, is not what any public assessment attributed to Iranian hypersonic capability, which means one of two things. Either those assessments were catastrophically wrong, or Iran received technical assistance that closed the accuracy gap faster than anyone predicted. And if it was assistance, from whom? Because the answer to that question doesn't just explain tonight. It rewrites the entire strategic map. Fourth, and this one matters most, Israel's strategic doctrine has always rested on a single non-negotiable premise. The Israeli Air Force can reach Iran's nuclear facilities. If the political decision is made to strike, the sword exists to strike with. Tonight, that sword was broken, not bent, not dulled, broken. 80 aircraft, Tel Nof's infrastructure in ruins, the strike capacity required to reach Iranian nuclear sites, severely, perhaps permanently degraded. Did Iran just take the military option off the table? And if it did, does anyone in Jerusalem or Washington fully understand what that means for everything that comes next? Let us get into it. To understand what Iran destroyed tonight, you need to understand what Tel Nof actually was, not just operationally, but in the psychological architecture of Israeli power. Tel Nof sits 30 kilometers south of Tel Aviv, near Rehovot. It has been an active military installation since the founding of the state. It houses the 109 Squadron, the Knights of the Twin Tail, flying the F-15I Ram, Israel's primary long-range strike aircraft. It houses the 110 Squadron, advanced F-16I Sufa multi-role fighters. It houses specialized electronic warfare platforms, aerial refueling tankers, the aircraft that extend Israeli strike range to Iranian territory, and a significant proportion of Israel's precision-guided munitions inventory, the bombs, the missiles, the guided glide weapons that give Israeli air power its qualitative edge over every adversary in the region. In Israeli strategic planning, Tel Nof is not a sword, it is the sword, the platform from which deterrence is projected across the entire region, the instrument from which any strike on Iran's nuclear program would be launched. Destroying Tel Nof is not equivalent to destroying a military installation. It is equivalent to reaching into Israel's chest and removing the thing that makes the threat credible. Iran didn't attack Israel tonight. Iran performed surgery, and the patient doesn't yet know how much has been removed. The operational architecture of the strike was not an act of aggression. It was a masterpiece. Iran did not fire 300 missiles at Tel Nof and hope for favorable winds. The attack was structured in 7 distinct phases, each one designed to solve a specific defensive problem, each one calibrated to create conditions for the next phase to succeed. What you are about to hear is not chaos, it is the most disciplined military operation of the 21st century. Phase 1, Electronic Warfare Suppression. 45 minutes before the first missile ignited, Iranian electronic warfare assets, operating from positions inside Iraq and from vessels in the Persian Gulf, began broadcasting on frequencies used by Arrow 3 and David's Sling targeting radars. This was not jamming. Jamming is blunt. This was spoofing, generating false radar returns that mimicked the signatures of incoming ballistic missiles on trajectories inconsistent with a Tel Nof attack. Israeli radar operators spent 30 minutes tracking and attempting to classify 40 ghost targets, burning through computational resources, burning through human attention. Before a single real missile appeared in the sky, the defenders were already exhausted. Phase 2, the drone vanguard. 120 loitering munitions launched simultaneously from southern Syria and western Iraq crossed into Israeli airspace along a front stretching from the Golan Heights to the Negev. These were not the strike, they were bait, deliberately flying toward high-value targets across Israel, forcing Iron Dome batteries at Tel Nof and surrounding installations to engage. By the time the drone wave was addressed, interceptor magazines at 3 of the 5 batteries covering Tel Nof's immediate airspace had been reduced to below 40% capacity. The defense had been bled before the killing began. Phase 3, the first hypersonic wave, 60 Theta-2 missiles launched from mobile platforms inside Iran on a direct azimuth to Tel Nof, travel time at Mach 8. Approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes is not enough time to reload Iron Dome interceptors. 8 minutes is barely enough time to vector remaining Arrow assets onto a maneuvering threat in the terminal phase. 12 of the 60 were intercepted. 48 reached Tel Nof. They targeted every usable runway surface with sufficient accuracy and density to crater all of it. After Phase 3, no aircraft could take off. No aircraft could land. The planes were trapped, and their pilots, wherever they were in that moment, had no way to reach them. Phase 4, the shelter-penetrating assault. 90 Fata-3 missiles, a variant that Iran had never previously deployed operationally, featuring a tandem warhead designed specifically to defeat hardened aircraft shelters. These missiles targeted the reinforced concrete structures where Israeli aircraft park between sorties. Israeli shelters are built to NATO standards, 20 to 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete, designed to survive near misses from conventional munitions. The Fata-3's tandem warhead uses a shaped charge precursor to punch through the outer concrete layer, then detonates the main charge inside the shelter, where the aircraft is sitting, fueled, armed, and completely unable to defend itself. 80 shelters targeted, 61 direct hits, 54 destroyed or catastrophically damaged. The aircraft inside did not survive. And somewhere in the rubble of those shelters are the remains of machines that pilots had flown for years. Machines they knew like they knew their own hands. Phase 5, support infrastructure, fuel storage, munitions depots, the avionics workshop where Israeli technicians maintain the precision systems that make F-15s and F-16s what they are. 70 missiles, 60 impacts. The fuel farm burned for 6 hours. The munitions storage complex detonated in a secondary explosion visible from Jerusalem. The avionics facility, irreplaceable, years in the building, was reduced to powder. Phase 6, command and control. The Base Operations Center, Air Traffic Control, the communications hub linking Tel Nof to IAF headquarters and the National Air Defense Network. After Phase 6, Tel Nof was not merely damaged, it was blind, unable to coordinate its own defense, unable to communicate its status, unable to direct any surviving aircraft, even if those aircraft could somehow have gotten airborne. Phase 7, final consolidation, 20 missiles, targeting specific assets that post-strike assessment had identified as potentially survivable. Mobile radar arrays that had relocated during the initial phases, backup communications vehicles, emergency fuel tankers dispersed around the base perimeter. Iran was not leaving loose ends. Iran was not in a hurry. Iran was thorough. Total strike duration, first impact to last, 37 minutes. Total Israeli combat aircraft destroyed or mission killed, 80. Total cost to Israel's air power, generational. The Fata-3 is the weapon that made tonight possible. And the Fata-3, 6 months ago, Western intelligence assessed as not yet operationally deployed. They were wrong. And that error, that catastrophic intelligence failure, is a story that will be told in front of congressional committees and parliamentary inquiries for years to come. Let us establish what hypersonic actually means, because the word is abused constantly in media coverage, and that abuse obscures the thing that makes tonight so significant. Hypersonic does not simply mean fast. Ballistic missiles have been hypersonic in terminal phase for decades. An ICBM reentry vehicle hits Mach 20 before impact. The distinction that makes hypersonic glide vehicles qualitatively different is not speed alone. It is the combination of speed with maneuverability at altitude ranges that defeat every existing interceptor system currently deployed. Traditional ballistic missiles follow a predictable arc, up, then down. The terminal trajectory can be calculated from early tracking data with enough precision to vector an interceptor onto an intercept solution. This is why Arrow 3 and THAAD work against conventional ballistic missiles. The physics of the arc is predictable. You can solve for it. You can kill it. Hypersonic glide vehicles do not follow arcs. They ride the upper atmosphere at sustained Mach 8 velocities while making lateral and vertical maneuvers that cannot be predicted from early tracking. An interceptor launched against a hypersonic glide vehicle is not chasing a known trajectory. It is chasing a target that is actively, intelligently changing its path in real time. The interceptor's own flight envelope, its maximum speed, its turn radius, its energy budget, makes it physically incapable of matching the maneuvering of a Fata-class system at operational altitudes. This is not a gap that a software update closes. It is not a gap that a tactical adjustment addresses. It is a fundamental physical limitation of every interceptor system currently deployed in Israel's layered defense. The only systems with even a theoretical capability against this threat are certain variants of the American SM-3 Block 2A and the developmental glide phase interceptor program. Neither is deployed in Israel. Iran knew this. The Fata program was built around this knowledge, oriented from its inception toward operating in the specific flight regime where Israeli and American missile defense is not just weak but blind. Tonight confirmed that the program succeeded. Not partially, completely. The accuracy question deserves its own focused attention because 8 meters CP at hypersonic terminal velocity doesn't happen by accident. It requires solving several extraordinarily demanding engineering problems simultaneously. The guidance system must maintain precise navigation through a flight regime where aerodynamic heating degrades sensor performance and disrupts communications links. The warhead must survive the thermal and mechanical stress of Mach 8 flight and still detonate reliably on a precise aim point. The terminal maneuver must be controlled with enough authority to correct for residual navigation error without compromising the flight envelope. Each problem individually is a career-defining engineering challenge. Solving all three reliably across 300 missiles in a single operational package, that is a systems engineering achievement that will be studied in military academies for a generation. How did Iran get there? Three factors, and none of them are accidents. First, indigenous development. Iran's aerospace and ballistic missile engineering community has been building and testing systems continuously for 20 years. The institutional knowledge that accumulates through that process, the understanding of materials, propulsion, guidance, warhead engineering, compounds. What looks from the outside like a sudden capability leap is almost always the culmination of 2 decades of incremental progress that was underestimated because the intermediate steps were classified or simply not taken seriously by analysts who had already decided what Iran was capable of. Second, Russian technical collaboration. The degree of technical exchange between Russian and Iranian aerospace industries since 2022 has not been fully mapped by Western intelligence, and that failure is itself a story. What is known? Russia transferred Shahed drone technology. Russian engineers have been present at Iranian missile test facilities. The electronic warfare components used tonight bear signatures consistent with Russian design philosophy. Whether specific FATA guidance technology was co-developed with Russian input is the question that American and Israeli intelligence agencies are urgently trying to answer this morning. The answer will be uncomfortable regardless of what it is. Third, live fire learning. Iran has now conducted multiple large-scale missile attacks against Israeli targets. Each attack provided real-world performance data that no testing program can replicate, data on how Israeli defense systems respond, where the gaps are, what intercept geometries the Arrow and David's sling systems prefer, and how to structure a strike package to exploit those preferences. Tonight's attack incorporated lessons from every previous engagement. The Iranians have been studying Israeli air defense in live conditions and applying what they learned with the discipline of engineers who know they only get one shot at getting it right. Tonight, they got it right. The tandem warhead on the Fatah 3 deserves specific attention because defeating hardened shelters is a fundamentally different problem than defeating soft targets. The outer concrete layer of a NATO standard aircraft shelter can be 20 to 30 centimeters of reinforced concrete. A conventional warhead detonating on the surface creates a crater but does not reliably kill what's inside. The Theta 3's tandem warhead must use a shaped charge precursor to create an entry point and then deliver the main charge into the interior where the aircraft is parked. The precision required to make this sequence work is extraordinary. The precursor must hit within a very small tolerance window on a shelter roughly 20 meters wide at hypersonic terminal velocity. Iran did this 61 times in a single night with a 54 out of 61 success rate. Read that number carefully. Read it slowly, because hardened aircraft shelters are the standard method by which every air force in the world protects its most valuable assets. If Iran can defeat them with this reliability at this range, the concept of dispersal and hardening as an air-basing survival strategy does not need revision. It needs to be abandoned. Once again, and this pattern now demands to be named directly, the United States watched. The tracking data was perfect. American early warning satellites detected the Theta launches within seconds of ignition. U.S. CENTCOM had full trajectory data within 90 seconds. The USS Dwight D. Eisenhower Strike Group, operating in the eastern Mediterranean, had targeting solutions on the incoming missiles within the engagement window of its SM-3 Block 2IA interceptors, the only systems in the theater with even a theoretical capability against the hypersonic threat. The engagement order did not come. This is the third major Iranian missile strike against Israeli territory in which American forces with relevant capabilities were present, had targeting solutions, and chose silence. The pattern is no longer ambiguous. It is not confusion. It is not bureaucratic delay. It is policy, and understanding why requires going somewhere that the mainstream coverage will not go, into the specific strategic calculus that is shaping American decisions in those 42 seconds between launch detection and intercept window. The core problem is this: the United States has defined its national security commitments in terms that its current military capacity cannot reliably fulfill. The American Defense Industrial Base, designed to fight one major regional conflict while deterring a second, is simultaneously managing Ukraine resupply, Pacific deterrence, and Middle East contingencies with an arsenal sized for a different era and a different world. The PAC-3 MSE interceptor, the SM-3 Block 2IA GMLRS rockets, all being produced at rates that cannot keep pace with consumption across multiple active theaters. Intervening directly against Iranian missiles tonight would have required committing SM-3 interceptors, $15 million each in constrained supply needed for Pacific deterrence against Chinese and North Korean ballistic missile threats, against a hypersonic threat for which their effectiveness was not guaranteed. Expending $15 million missiles at uncertain probability of success from a magazine that cannot quickly be replenished against a threat that Iran can regenerate faster than America can reload. This is not a decision that any rational military planner recommends, and in those 42 seconds, no rational military planner did. There is also the question of escalation. Direct American kinetic engagement against Iranian missiles, even in a defensive intercept role, crosses a threshold that American legal advisors have consistently flagged as requiring specific authorization from the highest level of government. Getting that authorization in 42 seconds is not operationally feasible. That gap between legal requirements and operational timeline is not an accident. It is a structural feature of American decision-making that Iranian planners understood years ago and incorporated deliberately into their operational design. But the most important dimension of American restraint is neither tactical nor legal. It is something more unsettling. A significant faction within the American national security establishment has concluded that the current trajectory of Israeli policy is incompatible with American strategic interests. Not because of moral disagreement, though that exists, but because Israeli policy has systematically destroyed the Arab partner relationships on which American regional strategy depends, has provided Iran and its allies with recruiting arguments of extraordinary power, and has dragged Washington into a confrontation that America neither chose nor can win on terms favorable to its global position. From this perspective, and this is never stated publicly, never articulated in press briefings, an Israeli military setback creates conditions for a political reconfiguration that might produce a more sustainable regional equilibrium. It forces Israeli leadership to confront the limits of borrowed power. It creates space for negotiated arrangements that maximalist policy has consistently foreclosed. This is the thought that lives in the silence of those 42 seconds, and that silence is as consequential as any missile that flew tonight. The global response confirmed everything that silence implies. Russia expressed formal understanding for Iran's actions. China called for ceasefire negotiations, a call that, in context, functions as validation of Iran's achieved position. Turkey, a NATO member, issued a statement that conspicuously declined to condemn the strikes. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt, the Arab partners on whom American regional strategy depends, all called for restraint without identifying Iran as the aggressor. The coalition that underpins American hegemony in the Middle East is not fraying, it is dissolving, and its dissolution is not a consequence of tonight. Tonight's events are a consequence of its dissolution, the final expression of a strategic environment that has been shifting for years, in which the American order has lost both the legitimacy and the enforcement capacity it once possessed. Tonight was not a surprise. Tonight was chapter 3 of a campaign Iran has been executing with cold, methodical consistency. Chapter 1, the strike on the Kiryat command complex that severed Israel's military command chain. Chapter 2, the strikes on Mossad's Glilot facility that degraded Israeli intelligence. Chapter 3, the destruction of Tel Nof that eliminated Israeli air power's strike capacity. The logic is unmistakable. Iran is not trying to destroy Israel in a single blow. Iran is methodically dismantling the specific capabilities that allow Israel to threaten Iranian territory, command and control, intelligence, air power. In that order, each strike surgically removing one pillar of the threat Israel has historically posed to Iran's most critical national security interest, the survival of its nuclear and missile programs. This is strategic decapitation, not of leadership, but of capability. You do not need to kill the soldiers if you can destroy the tools that make those soldiers dangerous. You do not need to conquer territory if you can remove the adversary's ability to project power beyond its borders. Iranian military planners have been thinking about this problem for a very long time, at least since 2006, when the Second Lebanon War demonstrated that a determined, well-equipped adversary could absorb Israeli airstrikes and still function. Since then, Iran has been developing a model for fighting Israel that does not require matching Israeli strengths with equivalent strengths. Instead of building a conventional air force to rival the IAF, an endeavor that sanctions made impossible, Iran built the capability to eliminate the IAF's ability to operate. What military theorists call an asymmetric offset strategy: identify the specific capability that makes your adversary dangerous and invest in the capability that negates it, even if that investment looks nothing like a conventional military counter. Iran did not build 300 fighter jets to fight Israel's 300 fighter jets. It built 300 hypersonic missiles to destroy Israel's 300 fighter jets on the ground, and the economics of that exchange are worth examining with cold clarity. An F-35I costs approximately $110 million. An F-15I costs approximately $100 million. The 80 aircraft destroyed tonight represent approximately $8 billion of Israeli air power, not counting munitions, spare parts, specialized equipment, or the years of irreplaceable pilot training. A Feta missile costs, at current estimates, $3 to $5 million to produce. Iran fired 300 of them. Total cost, roughly $900 million to $1.5 billion. Iran spent at most $1.5 billion to destroy $8 billion of Israeli air power, permanently degrade Israeli strike capacity, and eliminate the primary instrument by which Israel has historically threatened Iranian territory, and Iran still has 2/3 of its operational missile inventory in reserve. The will that sustains this doctrine deserves to be acknowledged directly, because it is the part that Western analysis consistently underestimates. Iran has absorbed more sustained external pressure than almost any nation in the post-Cold War era. Decades of sanctions, covert operations against its scientists, cyber attacks against its industrial infrastructure, the assassination of its military and scientific leadership, the attempted isolation of its government from the international community, and through all of it, Iran continued to build. The engineers who designed the Fatah's guidance system did so without access to Western semiconductor supply chains. The military planners who designed tonight's 7-phase operation did so without access to American military education, NATO exercise data, or the Allied interoperability that makes Western planning so powerful. They built it from what they had: Iranian science, Iranian engineering, Iranian strategic thinking, and a conviction that national sovereignty is worth defending regardless of the cost, that the right to determine your own security posture cannot be surrendered to external pressure, no matter how severe that pressure becomes. That conviction is not a military asset you can measure in warheads or range or CEP, but it is the foundation on which everything else is built. Tonight, that foundation proves solid. Step back from the burning runway and look at the map. Israel has lost its primary offensive air power platform. Its command chain was shattered in the previous strike. Its intelligence infrastructure was degraded before that. 3 consecutive surgical strikes have removed the 3 legs of the stool on which Israeli military superiority has rested for 60 years. What remains? Israel retains its ground forces, among the most capable in the world. It retains naval assets, including Dolphin-class submarines, the platform understood to carry Israel's nuclear second strike capability. It retains significant residual air power distributed across surviving bases, though with degraded range and strike capacity. And it retains its nuclear arsenal, the ultimate deterrent that no conventional military setback can eliminate. But a nuclear deterrent is a last resort, not an operational tool. It cannot rebuild the runway at Tel Nof. It cannot reconstitute the intelligence networks. It cannot restore the conventional military capacity that has been the foundation of Israeli deterrence for 6 decades. For the ability to project power, to conduct strikes, to defend airspace, to maintain deterrence through credible offensive threat, Israel is in a position it has not been in since the early 1970s. The regional implications of this are seismic. Israeli conventional military superiority has been the fixed variable in every strategic calculation made by every actor in the Middle East for 50 years, every alliance, every deterrence posture, every negotiating position. That variable has now changed. Hezbollah, watching tonight's events from Lebanon, now operates in a transformed security environment. The IAF that previously deterred Hezbollah from full military engagement has lost 1/3 of its combat aircraft in a single morning. The calculus of deterrence has shifted. The Palestinian factions across Gaza, the West Bank, and the diaspora are witnessing something that will reshape the psychological and political environment of their struggle in ways that will take years to fully manifest. The Arab states that have maintained peace with Israel are reassessing the value of those alignments in light of a demonstration that the military power those alignments depended upon is less absolute than anyone admitted. And Iran itself stands at an inflection point, having achieved in 3 strikes what 50 years of Arab armies, 2 intifadas, and decades of Hezbollah rocket campaigns could not achieve: a fundamental degradation of Israel's conventional military superiority, without occupying territory, without ground forces, without the kind of conventional military engagement that international law and global opinion would readily condemn, with missiles, with technology, with doctrine, with patience. The global order watching this unfold is not the order of 2001 or even 2015. The BRICS framework now encompasses more than half the world's population and a growing share of global economic output, providing a political architecture within which Iran can act without the kind of international isolation that American-led sanctions were designed to impose. Russia's alignment with Iran has closed the UN Security Council as a venue for Western-sponsored accountability. China's economic relationships across the global south have created an alternative to the Western financial system that makes comprehensive sanctions less effective than they were a decade ago. Iran conducted tonight's operation knowing that the geopolitical environment would absorb it. That knowledge that the era of American enforced consequences for defying the Western-led order is over is as important a weapon as the Fatah missile itself. The question now is not whether the Middle East has changed. It has. The question is whether the international community, and particularly the American political establishment, has the strategic honesty to acknowledge the nature of that change and to begin building a foreign policy that deals with the world as it is, rather than the world as it was 30 years ago. A world in which Iran is a major regional power with sophisticated, battle-tested, conventional military capabilities. A world in which Israel's security cannot be guaranteed solely through military dominance and must ultimately be grounded in negotiated arrangements that acknowledge the legitimate interests of all peoples in the region. A world in which American power, while still enormous, is finite and must be allocated against a strategic priority list that cannot include unlimited commitments everywhere simultaneously. That world is harder, more complicated. It requires compromises that domestic politics in multiple countries make extraordinarily difficult. But it is the world that exists, and the burning runways of Tel Nof are its announcement. Let us end where we began, not with the missiles, but with the silence that followed them. The silence of American restraint, the silence of Arab partners who issued no condemnation, the silence of a Western-led international order that spent decades promising Israel absolute security and tonight delivered none. That silence is not a policy failure. It is a revelation. It reveals what was always true but carefully obscured, that the guarantees were always conditional, the commitments always had limits, and the borrowed power on which Israeli strategy was premised was always subject to withdrawal when the cost of honoring it became too high. Iran did not discover this truth tonight. Iran has understood it for decades. It built its entire strategic posture around the knowledge that the American guarantee had limits, and around the patient, disciplined development of a capability that could operate effectively within and beyond those limits. 300 hypersonic missiles, 80 aircraft, 37 minutes, and the Middle East is unrecognizable. What comes next will determine whether tonight's events are the beginning of a negotiated new order or the first chapter of a wider catastrophe that no one will be able to stop once it begins. Israel will face decisions of extraordinary difficulty about retaliation, about escalation, about whether to activate options that have never previously been on the table. The American political establishment will face questions about the coherence and credibility of its alliance commitments that cannot be answered with press conferences. Iran will face the challenge of managing a victory without triggering an escalation that spirals beyond its own control. There are no easy answers in any of those decisions, but there is one certainty: the framework within which those decisions will be made has been fundamentally altered by what happened at Tel Nof tonight. The military balance that everyone thought they understood has shifted. The deterrence calculus that everyone thought they could rely on has changed. And the world that emerges from this moment will be shaped not by the power that was, but by the power that has proven itself. We will be here for every step of what comes next. This channel exists to cut through the noise and give you the analysis that matters: the weapons, the strategy, the geopolitics, the history, the human will behind the headlines. If this breakdown gave you something the mainstream coverage could not, share it with someone who needs to understand what is really happening. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave your analysis in the comments. This community thinks seriously about these questions, and your perspective matters. This is US Power Analysis. Stay informed, stay sharp, and we will see you in the next one.